Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a visual journey into a world of just breathtaking detail, intense color, and really profound devotion. We're looking at the illuminated folios of the Rajasthani schools of painting. Now, if you've ever admired South Asian art, you have definitely seen these vibrant miniatures, but we're going to move way beyond the old idea of a single monolithic Rajput style. Instead, we're diving into a highly specialized, fiercely regional spectrum of royal ateliers that created, honestly, some of the most captivating art in human history.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We are going to cover 1. Redefining the Rajput label. 2. Mastering the miniature technique. 3. Poetry, music, and devotion. 4. The bold and the fierce regional styles. And 5. Romance and imperial splendor.
All right, Section 1, Redefining the Rajput label.
So, back in 1916, the pioneering scholar A.K. Kumaraswamy came up with this broad umbrella term, Rajput paintings. It essentially grouped together every indigenous painting tradition that flourished before the Mughal conquest. So he merged Rajasthan, Malwa in central India, and the Pahari schools of the Himalayas into just one single dynastic bucket. But modern art history has evolved a lot since then. Today, we've closed that umbrella. We celebrate these artworks not as one unified style, but as geographically specific, highly localized visual dialects. We're talking about very distinct Rajasthani schools, places like Mewar, Bundi, Kota, Jaipur, Bikaner, Kishangarh, and Jodhpur. And every single one of them has its own totally unique artistic DNA.
Moving on to Section 2, Mastering the miniature technique. Before we even look at what they painted, we have to talk about how they painted. Because creating a miniature was this intensely rigorous physical process. Step 1 is the canvas. These were never painted on just a single fragile sheet of paper. Instead, artists worked on waslis. Those are multiple thin sheets of handmade paper painstakingly glued together in layers to get this perfect thickness and sturdiness. Next up, the pigments. No synthetic paints here. They were pulling colors directly from nature. Artists were actually grinding up brilliant lapis lazuli, malachite, cinnabar, and even precious metals like gold and silver. They'd bind them with an organic glue and apply them with ultrafine brushes crafted from camel hair and, believe it or not, squirrel hair. I mean, you can only imagine the microscopic detail you'd need that for. And finally, the polish. The completed folio was placed face down and vigorously burnished with an agate stone. That grueling physical process is exactly what gives the final surface that breathtaking, uniform sheen that you still see in museums today.
The really crucial takeaway here is that we need to totally deconstruct this romanticized myth of a lone genius painting by candlelight. It just didn't happen that way. The Royal Atelier was a highly structured, collaborative workshop. First, the master artists conceptualized the whole scene, drawing preliminary outlines right onto the wasli. Then, specialists or apprentices took over. You might have one guy who was an absolute expert in lush landscapes, and another who only did animals or intricate architecture. Once the colors were in, it was handed off to a scribe, who carefully inked poetic verses into the deliberate negative space at the top. But the piece wasn't truly finished until step 4, Gudarai. That's when the master artist came back to the canvas to apply the final, elevating finishing touches. It literally translates to the lift, elevating the team's collaborative work to actual masterpiece status.
Which brings us to Section 3, Poetry, Music, and Devotion.
So, what was the engine driving all this incredible technical mastery? It lies in the profound spiritual core of these paintings, Vaishnavism and the Bhakti movement. This movement completely transformed religious expression in the region. Suddenly, Krishna wasn't being worshipped just as a distant cosmic creator. He became the archetypal ideal lover. The very concept of human love became a religious theme. And right beside him is Radha, who represents the human soul offering itself in complete self-abandoning devotion. This brilliant synthesis meant that pure earthy sensuousness and deep divine mysticism were completely intertwined on the canvas.
To perfectly capture that devotion, artists basically used foundational poetic texts as their blueprints. They leaned heavily on the 12th century Gita Govinda, which evokes the intense, mystical love between Radha and Krishna, using really vivid worldly imagery. They also reference the 14th century Rasamanjari, which is this fascinating text that strictly categorizes heroes and heroines by their physical traits and emotional states. Then there's the beloved 1591 Rasika Priya, which dives into complex emotive states. Think bitter separation or pure joyful togetherness. And finally,
Texts like the Baramasa gave artists climactic, evocative descriptions of the 12 months, the changing seasons and local festivals, setting the absolute perfect backdrop for these lovers' encounters.
All of this poetic inspiration translates into one of the most conceptually stunning inventions in Indian art, the ragamala, which means a garland of melodies. Now, how do you actually paint a song? Think about that for a second. The ragamalas are pictorial manifestations of musical modes. The artists were literally envisioning pure sound in human or divine form. Each specific melody was intrinsically tied to a specific time of day, a particular season, and a very precise emotional mood. These were meticulously structured into albums of exactly 36 or 42 harmonious folios, usually headed by 6 male ragas and their branching female consorts, the raganis. It's a true multisensory experience captured right there on paper.
Okay, Section 4, the bold and the fierce. Let's look at the regions.
We're going to start our tour in Mewar, which is really the bold, indigenous root of Rajasthani painting. Notice how the prominent, highly saturated reds and yellows just immediately command your attention. This school was famous for a direct, super vibrant approach that actively and stubbornly resisted early external influences from the Mughal Empire. The genesis of this specific aesthetic is anchored right here in the formative 1605 Ragamala set, painted in Chawand by the pioneering artist Nasruddin. It's raw, it's highly emotive, and it is just unmistakably Mewar.
Now contrast that with the Bundi school. Here we start to see some early cross-pollination. The formative artists in Bundi actually proudly introduced themselves as pupils of master painters from the imperial Mughal court. And you can see the result: lush flora, totally unblemished color, and stunning night settings warmly illuminated by human-shaped lamps and a glowing yellow moon. But really draw your eyes to that stark yellow patch right at the top. It is completely blank. That is vital physical proof of the collaborative atelier we talked about earlier. It proves to us that the visual painting was finished entirely before it was ever passed to the scribe to add the verse. Originating from the exact same kingdom as Bundi, Kota branched off to become its own distinct entity around 1625, and it evolved into the most dynamic, action-obsessed school of them all. You can literally feel the kinetic thrill of a royal hunting expedition here. Kota is celebrated for highly spontaneous, calligraphic brushstrokes and an unmatched energy when rendering fierce combat and muscular animals. Also, if you look closely at the faces, you'll spot their distinct stylistic hallmark, the pronounced shading of the double-lid eye. Next, we travel over to Jodhpur in the Marwar region. Despite some pretty heavy political pressure from the Mughals, Jodhpur proudly maintained a formidable and widespread indigenous folk style. They relied on a rugged, earthy palette to immortalize deeply entrenched oral traditions and romantic ballads, the most famous being the trials of Dola Maru, who you see depicted here on camelback. Later on, Jodhpur successfully pivoted this robust style into extensive documentary painting, meticulously recording daily court life way before the invention of photography.
Finally, Section 5, Romance and Imperial Splendor. Bikaner is a perfect example of this shift. Because of their long-standing political ties to the imperial capital, Bikaner developed a pictorial language defined by supreme Mughal elegance and a very subdued, almost misty, dreamlike color palette. And what's absolutely incredible for art historians is that Bikaner is the best documented school of them all. Thanks to these meticulous royal archival diaries called bahis, alongside precise inscriptions on the backs of the folios themselves, we know exactly how their mandis studio system functioned. We can actually trace the lineage of master artists, or ustads, who managed the mass production of copies, restorations, and stunning original masterpieces. Just look at the spatial ingenuity happening in this 1683 masterpiece by the celebrated Bikaner master Nuruddin. It's illustrating verses from the Rasika Priya. Notice how he uses a simple, soft, undulating green mound right in the dead center of the composition. This pictorial prop ingeniously operates as a stage divider, seamlessly splitting the canvas into two totally distinct psychological realms. Up at the top, the minimal palatial architecture sets the stage for an initial indoor emotional interaction. Then, your eye naturally flows down past the mound to the pastoral landscape, progressing the narrative right to the outdoors at the bottom. I mean, it's visual storytelling at its absolute finest. Now contrast pretty much everything we've seen so far with Kishangar. This school is the absolute apex of romantic stylization. Flourishing under the incredibly passionate patronage of ruler Salwant Singh and his visionary artist Nihal Chand, Kishangar is defined by these highly exaggerated, ultra-sophisticated facial features. Just marvel at those exquisite, tiny figures of the divine lovers.
But what really sets them apart is how these tiny figures are placed against breathtaking, sweeping, almost infinite panoramic vistas, topped with powerfully accentuated skies. It's just pure visual poetry.
And finally, we have to talk about the lavish extravagance of Jaipur. Because the rulers of Amer forged such incredibly close alliances with Mughal emperors, their aesthetic became a perfected, totally seamless synthesis of Mughal refinement and bold indigenous vibrancy. By the time we hit the early 19th century, Jaipur ateliers weren't just painting tiny miniatures anymore, they were operating on a massive scale. We're talking life-size portraits and heavily crowded, insanely complex compositions like the Hour of Gajhuli. And all of it is just dripping with an almost excessive, brilliant application of lavish gold. It is the definition of imperial splendor. So, as we wrap things up, this comparative table really pulls all these threads together perfectly. We can clearly see how the Rajput monolith completely breaks down once you look closely. From the bold reds and low Mughal influence of Mewar, to the hunting thrills of Kota, to the misty elegance of Bikaner, the extreme stylization of Kishangarh, all the way to the lavish gold of Jaipur. It was these different degrees of imperial influence, combined with distinct core subjects, whether that was religious texts, bardic legends, or courtly splendor, that ultimately forged these incredibly varied visual signatures across the entire map of Rajasthan.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought today. These illuminated folios are a testament to a very specific, magical moment in history. A moment where meticulous, collaborative studio science, literally grinding lapis lazuli by hand and burnishing paper with agate, met profound, self-abandoning mystical devotion. Just think about what it actually takes to envision the melody of a song or the changing of a season, and then permanently immortalize it on a single, fragile layer of Wosley paper. It's a world where human devotion and divine love were, quite literally, painted with the exact same brush. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.